IllinoisPolicy.org. You will find more useful and interesting information there than really about 4 or 5 other websites combined. One of the fine people who works for Illinois Policy, writes for him, as well as the Director of Content Strategy. That's Austin Berg. He's on the line with us this morning. Austin, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking time out of your day for us. What a great piece you have up. It's Illinois' birthday. Hey, wait, come back. First off, killer title for a story that, for those of us who live here and have called Illinois home our entire lives, painful.
Very painful. And before I start talking about this data, it is not pretty, but the constant response that we get is, hey, why are you, putting down on Illinois? Why are you being so negative about Illinois? You want people to come here. Of course. I do not want to be reporting this information. This is where my family's from. This is where my roots are. But the problem is, this is Illinois' biggest, most pressing policy problem, in my opinion, is that we constantly are seeing people leaving. And we just saw recent data from the IRS that was for the 2015-2016 tax year. In Illinois, saw a record loss of people. And not just people, they take their wallets with them. So Illinois also saw a record loss of income, all to other states. We lost about 86,000 people, and that accounts for a net loss of nearly $5 billion to other states. This is a massive problem.
That is, and like you, and I want to say the same thing. My family has lived here for generations. We're Illinoisans through and through. I take no joy in any of this, and I've got the same thing. Well, why do you keep harping on the negatives? Well, because the negatives are going to overwhelm us here.
Exactly. I mean, the role of our group, the Illinois Policy Institute, is to tell the truth about these types of issues. And if we don't address the problem head on, we're not going to be able to solve it. So when we talk about people who are leaving, we ask them, there's polling data on this, what's the number one reason you're leaving? The number one reason is taxes. So without addressing that problem, you're not going to solve this massive people problem that Illinois has.
And it's one of those that has been going on for a while. I know Illinois Policy has been on the forefront of reporting, I think one of the first times I ever heard the outbound or outward migration. I hadn't heard that term used before until I was reading a piece at Illinois Policy which broke it down, and that's just basically your state sending its people or its people leaving to go elsewhere. Where did number one is still what? Florida? Is that the number one draw for us?
Yeah, so in terms of people, the number one, there's 2 different sources of data. So you got the census and the IRS. The IRS data, just came out. The number one was Florida, which it usually is. Texas is number 2. And number 3, and this is the real indictment of the status quo in Illinois, is Indiana. It's not a southern state. It's not where retirees are going. It's not because of the weather. It's because there's greater middle-class opportunity just across the border in Indiana, not just Florida and Texas.
Yeah, and Florida and Texas, people, the no-income tax thing, that's what it is. Yeah, well, it's more than that. It's warmth. It's the other things. But Indiana, what's the draw in Indiana?
So we've got, to be clear, it's not just Indiana. We lost on net people and income to every single neighboring state. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Missouri, Kentucky, and Iowa. And you actually, in the Rockford area, you can talk about Wisconsin. We lost 6,000 people to Wisconsin on net. That was just behind Indiana, $253 million in income on net to Wisconsin. So Indiana has much better jobs growth. Wisconsin has much better jobs growth. And you just look at the trends of the states. You think about the tax reform in those states. You think about the government union labor reform in those states. They're trending the right way for middle-class taxpayers, and you see the exact opposite mentality in Illinois.
We're spending time with Austin Berg, Illinois Policy, IllinoisPolicy.org. You point out here, Illinois lost $4.75 billion in AGI, adjusted gross income. Explain that a little bit.
Sure. So whenever a tax return, that's how it's measured as the IRS, leaves the state, there's obviously income associated with that tax return, and that's referred to as adjusted gross income. So again, if you care about having a balanced budget in Illinois, if you care about social services, if you care about infrastructure, it doesn't matter if you have a D or an R next to your name in the legislature. This people problem threatens all of that. If you have an eroding tax base, you're not going to be able to pay for new services. And the problem in Illinois is we see increasing tax hikes with no reform. So people are paying more and actually getting less. And it's a very easy, Wall Street Journal, for instance, their op-ed today pointed out that by moving from Lake County, Illinois, to Kenosha County, Wisconsin, you get an annual $3,200 break in your property taxes. That is a very simple calculation for most people to make. And the idea that people, don't move because of taxes, that state taxes don't really matter, and in the grand scheme of things, the data runs contrary to all of that.
Oh, yeah, and when you look at that annual property tax cut just from a simple move that really doesn't even take you all that far out of where you may live now.
Correct. I mean, you could still go to work in Illinois. That's the real problem. You could actually live. I mean, I think about a city in Illinois, once great city, Danville, right next to the border in Indiana. Indiana is literally touching Danville. It's about 3 miles away. They have $100 million in local pension debt. Why stick around? They're actually charging a fee, an annual fee on top of your property taxes. It can go up to $1,000 a year just to pay for that pension burden.
Okay.
So people need to understand that this is a real problem, and until you address the real cost drivers behind those property tax bills, until you take a really close look at that and really work to lower those costs for taxpayers, people are going to continue to leave, and the people who remain are going to end up paying more, and you get into a really dangerous spiral with that.
I thought one of the stunning things in your piece as well, Austin, when you talk about the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute found nearly half of Illinoisans want to leave. So the hemorrhaging that we're seeing now is from people who have found a mechanism to leave. The rest haven't yet. Correct.
And you look at the spread in the income of people who leave and people who come in, and that's what the IRS data is able to tell us as well. And the concerning thing is that the people leaving are, on average, much higher earners than the people coming in. So what you see is that the people with means are able to leave the state and see an opportunity elsewhere, but the people without, the people least able to shoulder the tax burden that is increasing because people are leaving, those are the people sticking around in Illinois. And you look at that same Paul Simon Public Policy poll. When this data comes out, we previously, last year, Steve Brown, Mike Madigan's spokesperson, said, well, we really need to get at the why. Why are these people leaving? It must just be, is it retirees going to be closer with their children? Is it just the weather? No, the number one reason in that poll is taxes. We know the reason people are leaving, and it's high taxes. So any discussion of this problem that does not address the high taxes in Illinois is not a serious discussion of it.
Oh, yeah, and I thought the same thing. What a disingenuous thing to say to begin with. Oh, well, we really don't know why. We'll have to look into this. Like nobody's run a poll in the field a few thousand times to ask this question.
Certainly, and I'm sure most of your listeners talk about, just talking in your communities. People are facing these same issues. Geez, this property tax bill came. It's bumping up against my mortgage. It's a simple calculation for people to make, and I want to stress the idea that it's not easy to move. Most people know this, but it takes a lot of time. It's a big risk. It's expensive for people to leave, to take their talent, their ingenuity, their roots, their family, their home, move that to another state. That is just such an indictment of the policy status quo in Illinois.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to get out of here and find somewhere else to do it.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this, because we're bumping up against a gubernatorial race. Is anybody saying the right things?
One thing I'm really discouraged by is that among the candidates that we have on the Democratic side, we are not really seeing any discussion of lowering the tax burden. All I hear from every single candidate is an endorsement of a progressive tax hike, as if the only problem in Illinois is that we don't take in enough revenue. If only we could hike taxes on the right people, then all of our problems would be solved. Illinois, keep in mind, has higher property taxes than every state with no income tax. No income tax at all. So the idea that, if we just hike the income tax, then all of our problems will be solved, then we can finally, lower those property tax bills for people. It's just absurd. And if you can't really be, have an honest discussion about that unless you're talking about things like, at the local level, enormous power for government unions to bargain really high raises above what taxpayers can afford, above what people in the private sector are earning, unlimited contract lengths, bargaining over every subject under the sun. Things like this really drive up property tax bills. Things like the prevailing wage, these mandated inflated wages on public construction projects. You have to take a really hard look at those things and propose solutions to get those bills down, or else we will not solve this problem.
It's a piece you're going to want to check out. It's called It's Illinois' Birthday. Hey, wait, come back. Written by Austin Berg, Illinois Policy. And as I mentioned, make sure you bookmark IllinoisPolicy.org. A lot of really, really useful information there. Austin, thanks for taking time out of your day for us. Great piece, and I appreciate you sharing the info.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.